Hi, I'm Merrill. I was a liveaboard in Boston Harbor for 7 years through 7 winters, and I'm here to give you some advice on living aboard in the winter. And I guess I'll start off by saying asking me how I lived aboard in the winter is the number one question that anyone's ever asked me about living aboard a boat. And seemingly anywhere I went and said I was a liveaboard, people would say, well, what do you do in the winter? But the real plot twist is that the summer is way worse than the winter. And I know you're wondering how could that be? But in the summer, I don't have AC on this boat. And so the teak decks light up like the third level of hell. And boy, can it be rough. As far as the winter goes, it's easy to put in some space heaters and all that other type of stuff. And it's not that big of a space. And so living aboard in the winter, totally doable and fairly easy to do. Well, I freeze to death if I live aboard where temperatures reach around negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. No, it is a pretty small space, and to heat it up and heat it up properly isn't that difficult to do. I will tell you one story about the cold winter days in Boston. So I had a friend of mine who lived on a Cal 330, and he had gone in a whole like alcohol binge the night before. And so he woke up in the morning on his boat. He forgot to turn on the heat, and he went for a glass of water. And he grabbed the glass of water and he went to drink it. And when he went to drink it, this block of ice came shooting out of the glass and broke his two front teeth. So all that to say, it can get pretty cold, but the secret is to always just have more blankets and just try to make it cozy. What are some winter playbooks? Do you stay in the water or haul out? What heaters are safe? How do you manage moisture and condensation? Okay, so I'm going to tackle these one at a time. Do you stay in the water or haul out? So stay in the water. Even in Boston, it's brackish water, and so there's kind of runoff from a freshwater river that comes in here, and then you also have the seawater. But in my time, I've only seen kind of surface level freezing. Another thing about sailboats is the depth of the keel, and where a lot of like the water tanks are generally below the water line, they don't really freeze. Um, so I've run a few heaters over the through the winter and made sure that the boat was just a tad bit above freezing, but I've never had any real issues when it comes to anything on the boat freezing. I will also say that you don't necessarily need a haul out, and the price ends up kind of being the same. A lot of people haul out because they think that they need to do some bottom paint, but the bottom paint can last a pretty long time. You can make it through several seasons without having to change that. What heating recommendations do you have for New England liveaboards? The recommendation of every liveaboard that I've run into along the way has always been to get yourself a portable Mr. Buddy, one of those little propane heaters. Now, the thing to be aware of it is combustion. You don't want to leave it unattended, and you definitely don't want to sleep with it. And in regards to that, make sure that you have a carbon monoxide detector on the boat and obviously a fire detector. The Mr. Buddy is like having a miniature fireplace that can just heat up the room super quick. You don't want to be running all the time. The propane burn, it creates a lot of moisture in the air, so it condenses. The oil heaters, which are they almost look like radiators, but they cycle oil through them. I'm not a huge fan of them. Kind of the idea is with this radiator thing, more air kind of goes into them and it kind of heats up. But what I found is that it'll heat up an area and all that heat will just go to the ceiling. And the heat will stay confined to that little area in the corner of the boat. The best thing to do on that front is to get one of the heating fans where it's like a fan and a heater. Those work wonderfully. It just pushes the air and moves the air, and that does a pretty good job of heating. Now, as far as some of the other options, right, you can get like a diesel heater. there's several versions of them. You know, there's the forced air diesel heaters, which you basically plumb into a fuel tank, and it's going to be, you can either get like one of the Wabastos, or people I've seen get the Chinese knockoffs, but the Chinese knockoffs haven't done too hot on that front. But when you start getting into like the diesel heaters, you're going to have to start dealing with kind of installation and all the chores that go with that. And you'd think that it would be relatively easy to install, but it ends up being a pretty big pain in the ass to pull off. And there's a lot of different moving parts, and there's a lot of different assembly and plumbing that has to be done. I, on this boat, also have a solid fuel heater. And so a solid fuel heater is one of those Dickinson solid fuel stoves. Basically, you can throw in charcoal and wood and anything else that'll burn. It has like a little grate in the front, so it looks like a little stove, a little heating stove fireplace in here. It does give off like a pretty cool smell of like, hey, you're in this super cozy place, but it can be a pain in the ass, and it's always a pain in the ass to put something in that little stove, and then all of a sudden it burns in like 30 minutes, and you have to get up, put some more stuff in it, and you know, keep it going. But at the end, all you need, Mr. Buddy, electric heater with a fan. The electric heater, you know, depending on where you are, if the marina charges you electricity, you're going to be probably looking at between, depending on how much they charge, an easy $100 to $200 a month to run the heater and probably all the other electrical that you got going on the boat. Should I shrink wrap a boat in the winter? Totally. Shrink wrap is this kind of see-through plastic, and they build a frame over the boat. So they basically wrap it in plastic and they shoot it with like a heat gun, and it shrinks a little bit. It's transparent. It almost looks like a greenhouse, and it creates a greenhouse effect. So if the sun is hitting it, it'll heat up the boat pretty good. It also adds like a condensation barrier. And so there's kind of this extra layer of trapped air. So it's not all coming into the boat. Another thing about the shrink wrap is that when, you know, the snow comes and it melts, and you know, water always finds a way to get into a boat somehow, and if that expands in the summer, you're going to end up having to deal with more problems than, you know, just doing it right the first time, which was to get a shrink wrap. So if you're going to be living aboard in the winter, always, always, always get a shrink wrap. You don't want to be dealing with all the snow on your deck anyway. And you know, to pay for a shrink wrap, it's really not that bad. You know, you're going to be looking, you know, depending on the service business, anywhere from 600 to 1500 for a 40-foot boat. So it's one of those things that you definitely want to have. What challenges should I expect living aboard year round, especially in the winter? You know, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that bad. You know, if you have a Mr. Buddy, if you have an electric fan heater, and you have a shrink wrap, you're going to be golden. Easy. It really was like a lot of community bonding, because a lot of people would hang out to each other. There's a surprisingly good amount of people that live on boats in some places. And during the winter, when nor'easters would come through, we would have storm parties, and everyone would get together and kind of bring food and drinks and all that other type of stuff. Living aboard was fun in the winter.